What are some of the things that you've seen in terms of the way that they deal with stress? What are some of the mistakes that women make in general and even men make as well in dealing with stress that you wish people would not do as much of?
Reach for the pain reliever when they get a headache. Occasionally, I'll get a headache. I am human as well. It would be really easy to grab an Aleve, but most of the time, I avoid that because I really want to understand what created that headache and what's going on in my world that has created that toxicity, essentially, that my body can't handle. The headache is probably number one, but a really close second is mitigating any sort of digestive issues with some sort of over-the-counter something for constipation, for acid reflux, anything to enhance digestion, even naturally using digestive enzymes. I would really counsel you to think twice about that. Because if you're eating things that your body cannot naturally digest, then you need to stop eating that. Yeah. That's just the bottom line. And most people don't want to modify their diet. Back to the diet word that we talked about earlier, I don't really call it a diet because most people think of diet as calorie restriction. There is an element of modifying what you're eating, more importantly, what you're eating than the quantity. If you're eating things that are not processed foods and are foods that your body naturally can digest, and you're controlling your eating window, your window of time that you've given yourself when I'm allowed to eat, it would be really hard for you to overconsume food. When we eat processed foods, empty calories, that's when we have the kind of issues that then would lead to somebody suggesting that you go on a calorie restrictive diet. I don't suggest a calorie restrictive diet. I actually suggest the opposite. Don't worry about calories. Concern yourself with avoiding what I refer to as kryptonite foods. Also restrict the window of time that you're eating, especially for anybody who has issues with sleeping or digestive issues. Makes a big difference when you're eating, not just what you're eating. In my book, What's Your Kryptonite? I talk a little bit about this. In our clinic for patients, I run a bioenergetic scan and it evaluates what food substances are creating toxicity. But in the absence of that, I will tell you that just about everybody has some sensitivity to dairy. And it's something in the way the dairy is processed in the United States. I think genetically over the centuries, we've become a mishmash genetically, and there's something in our genetic component that is not allowing us to break down dairy. Most people would say, well, just take those supplements that will help you break down dairy. And I caution you because if your body isn't naturally breaking down dairy, supplementing to break the dairy down is not the same as your body being able to naturally break down the dairy. Supplements might work in a pinch. Let's just say you're going to a birthday party and you're going to have cheesecake. Cheesecake's going to be the birthday cake. You know it in advance. You know that dairy doesn't agree with you, but you really want to have a small piece of cheesecake and live a little, right? In that one-off situation, go for it. Take your digestive enzymes that help to break down dairy, but don't make a habit of it, because if you make a habit of it, that dairy is ripping up your intestinal lining. So it tends to be dairy and gluten. Most people know about the effects of gluten, but I also tell this story in my book how I thought that gluten was my problem, and it is. I should avoid gluten. It's not going to hurt anybody to avoid gluten. But my husband went vegan. I don't recommend the vegan diet, but he went vegan anyway. It's a long story, a couple of years ago. So we hired a vegan chef to cook for him because he works really long hours. It was just easier than trying to go out and find vegan food. I don't have the time to cook that much, we know for sure. So she's making homemade gluten-free bread for us every week. She brings it on Monday, just came out of the oven, and she brings it, and it's just fabulous. I was eating a couple of pieces of this gluten-free bread regularly with whatever I was eating. And whenever I eat something that doesn't agree with me, people have different reaction, but my reaction, the absolute telltale sign, is that the inside of my mouth will get really irritated. I'll feel it restricted all the way down my esophageal tract. I can just tell that I'm torn up and it's getting worse. I had a more advanced test run because I couldn't figure out what was going on. I actually ran a food sensitivity test with blood work, which I also am able to run, but it's a little expensive. You've got to go get your blood drawn. So it's a pain in the neck. I don't do it unless we really know we need it. But I did it on myself because I was really curious. And it turned out that my main sensitivity was to yeast, not the gluten. So when I was talking to the chef the next week, I said, I don't know what's going on here, but I have this yeast sensitivity. She said that with gluten-free and these alternative flour pastries and bread, they put more yeast in them to offset the effects of not having the gluten in them. So this bread I was eating had 2 to 3 times the yeast that a normal piece of bread would have. It was 2 to 3 times as bad for me as eating a regular piece of bread. Mm-hmm. So those are the kinds of things that we discover whenever we actually do a food sensitivity scan or a food sensitivity test with blood work. But generally speaking, the top 3 are dairy, gluten, sugar. I would say yeast is probably in there too. A lot of women have a candida overgrowth of some sort. A lot of men do too, with different signs of fungus like toenail fungus or dandruff or other sorts of fungal related things could definitely point to a yeast overgrowth. When you're trying to eliminate these things, the real challenge is that the ingredients in things don't just say dairy, yeast, gluten. That's not what it says. It's got some odd chemical name, and you've got to do a little digging on your own to find that that actually is a derivative of yeast or a derivative of dairy or a derivative of something else. So anyway, those are the main things that if you don't have the ability to get a more precise report run, then that's a great place to start.